Emission Systems Test 12, Fuel and Emission Control Systems, Textbook Chapter 29, Ignition Systems. Ignition Systems, I got that board over there that's got all them, the evolution of ignition systems on it. The primary low voltage ignition system must be working correctly before any spark occurs from an ignition coil. Which component is not in the primary ignition circuit? A, ignition switch, B, spark plug wire, and C, pickup coil, or D, ignition module. The primary is the part that triggers. The secondary is where the work is done. That's true whether you're talking about a relay or an ignition system. Okay, so actually, well, and I can understand, I'm sure you understand the confusion about that, but think about it, your spark plug wiring is your secondary. That's where the high voltage pops. So the high voltage pop is on the secondary side, so put a B down there. The ignition module has direct control over the firing of the coils from an ignition system. Which components triggers or controls the module? What do you think?
So what was one?
Which part triggers the module to fire? You remember you just said it.
Pickup coil.
Yep, pickup coil. Okay, watch this, you guys. Watch. This is a coil. We're going to go with an old distributor here. The crank sensor pretty much does the same job as a pickup coil. Only the crank sensor gives it signal at crankshaft speed, and the pickup coil is going to be spinning at camshaft speed, which is half of crankshaft speed, right? Okay, so you've got right here a module. All right, the pickup coil has got two wires leaving it, going into that module, and that module has got B plus coming to it, and the coil has got B plus coming to it, and this one here goes to the negative side of the coil, that goes to the positive side of the coil, and then spark comes out here and goes to the middle of the distributor cap where it's sorted out and sent to the plug. So you got a pickup coil in here, which is going to have, you know, if you got a 6-cylinder, it'll have 6 points on it. If you got 8-cylinder, it'll have 8 points. So you got the same number of little, you know, teeth on your reluctor wheel that you do cylinders. And as they go wheeling past this pickup coil, it's really nothing except a little magnet with wire wrapped around it. And as that thing swings past there, it causes, you know, a wave signal to be generated in these wires right here. This module sends a pulsing signal to that. Now here's where the rubber meets the road. You take your test light and you hook it to ground and you touch it to the negative side of the coil, which is where this pulse is supposed to be happening. If you see a pulsing signal there, but the coil is not firing, that's a coil. Or if the coil is only firing a very short distance, you know, if it only fires a little bit, in other words, not very far, the coil is weak. Okay, so pay attention to that. Make sure you got, if you ain't got a pulsing signal, you either got a problem here, you got a problem there, or power's not feeding it or whatever. But typically you're going to see that. Now, I probably need to go through that little board over there while we're on ignition system. That's how that works. Now, what takes the place of this, watch this. You still got a coil. Now when you got an ECM, it's reading off the crankshaft, right? Got a crank sensor. Crank sensor sends a signal here. This acts as the module. That's not complicated, is it? Is it? That truck out there, the white one, that 2001 model, it's got that CSFI system on it. It has a crank sensor. You cannot turn the distributor on that one and set the time, and even though it has a distributor, if you turn the distributor, you'll just foul up rotor alignment and get the cam sensor out of sync and all that. Jeep Cherokees were like that. They have a crank sensor. If it has a crank sensor, you're not getting anything out of the distributor that's going to tell the coil to fire. Now, if it's got a crank sensor, that's what you're going to be looking for. That's where everything originates that's going to cause your coil to fire. Just like over there on that board, you see that little wheel with the sensor by it? It's talking to the engine controller. The engine controller is firing the coil pack up there. So this is how all that stuff works. Even on the ones with a coil pack, though, you can basically back probe one of the wires that's triggering the coil to fire, one of the primaries, and it will pulse. You know, if it's not pulsing, I'm looking for a crank sensor, or I'm seeing if the engine controller is not powered up. Of course, you can have wiring problems too. Now, let's move on here. That's number 2 is D, all of the above. Which components can trigger A, B, C, or D? Now, pickup coils only has one right answer, but you got other ones. The distributor ignition systems can be triggered by what? a Hall effect sensor, a magnetic sensor, a spark sensor? I don't think so. Come on in here, Curtis. Huh? Hey, Jake, what's up? Oh yeah, he's coming to, the alternator's on the table with the ticket.
Okay.
And he needs to, just give him your card and he'll swipe it and
Bring it back, pick it
and
up.
bring it in, yeah, bring it back on there. All right, so you got no spark sensor, do you? There's no such thing as a spark sensor, right? You may have a knock sensor. So distributor ignition systems, this is emissions test 12, Curtis. All right, so number 3 is basically going to be either A or B. It can be a magnetic sensor, which is like that one on that engine over there, or a Hall effect sensor. You know what a Hall effect sensor looks like, right? It creates a square wave. You know that little distributor I got on the board over there that's got the little the vanes that go between there's a little magnet and a little sensor, and every time that vane's between the magnet and the sensor, you know, it makes a square wave off on the signal. And that's what Hall effect's all about. The Hall effect sensor was created by a dentist long years ago, and it's been used from then. All right, see, ignition coil primary resistance is usually what? Primary resistance on an ignition coil is going to be very low. It won't usually be over 3 ohms, but you need to make sure that you know what it is on a good one, because that one up here that you see farthest up there by the distributor sticking up over the board, that one reads, it's usually like 0.3 on that one. If it's reading 0.2, it won't even start the car. And so you know that's a pretty good test to do one of those on primary resistance. Now remember, you remember this coil I drew up here? I meant to say this too. You got this one, and the one in the middle that the spark comes out of, right? Plus, minus. Now this circuit here, these 2 wires here, that's the primary. This, where the spark comes out, is your secondary. So when I'm talking secondary, I'm talking high voltage spark, the one that knocked the tar out of you. Who's been hit by high voltage spark? You had it? What does it feel like?
Don't feel good.
It just feels like it's making you jump, don't it? Yeah.
You know, like how electric fences or whatever?
Yeah.
That's how it feels.
Yeah, electric fence is popping about 40,000 volts.
Yeah,
They ain't nothing to sneeze at.
I used to have my horses or whatever. That's how, I mean, like every time I touch like
Well, it actually does. It actually does this. You know. Well, it depends on the fence box. If the fence box is grounded right and you got good wire that ain't rusty, you know, it'll get you. I mean, it's pretty nasty. One time my cousin came down from Phoenix City whenever I was a little boy. We had a hog pen in the backyard and had a fence around it. And I walked him out there and I said, "This is an electric fence. If you touch it, it will shock you." And he picked up a piece of metal and touched it with that metal. And, and I said, "What are you doing?" I told him to stay away from it. He touched it with a metal and it bit him, and I couldn't believe he was doing that. Okay. I mean, I was about 6 years old. You know, he was older than me. I thought he should have been smarter. Okay, coil polarity is determined by what? That's the direction of the rotation of the coil windings. And I will tell you that typically, if you reverse the polarity on an E-core coil, it doesn't cause as many problems as you do if you reverse the polarity on an oil-filled coil, which is the round one like you see on the other side. Turn that board kind of facing us over there, Curtis. And there you go. You see that oil-filled coil right up there? That oil-filled coil is this round one right here. That's an E-core. That's an E-core, and that's a sort of an E-core, but that's a coil pack, right? And so, and these are modules down here that fire the, you know, you can see those in the distributor got points in it. That points in that right there don't even need a module. But some Asian cars used to have points in the distributor that would trigger the module to fire the coil, and the module they called an igniter. That was eons ago. The compression sensing ignition system, ooh, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? Uses what type of ignition? That would be waste spark, which waste spark, why do they call it waste spark? Anybody know? You ever heard of waste spark ignition system? One of the sparks on that one, the waste spark would be like this one right here. Would be like that one. Because you got 6 cylinders and only 3 coils. And each cylinder is being, in other words, each coil fires a pair of cylinders, but the way that works is it fires anytime the piston is up. Right, when the piston's coming up, it pops both coils together. One spark is lighting off gasoline and causing causing your combustion event. The other one is just popping in a cylinder where nothing's going to happen. That's why they call it waste spark. It's popping in there where there's exhaust gas. So you got that? If I ask you a week from now what waste spark is, can you explain it so that it makes sense? Think about it. I'm somebody that just walked up and say, what's waste spark ignition? Could you explain it? You better be able to explain it. I'm going to be asking you guys questions expecting good answers. You know what I mean? And sometimes Curtis gives pretty doggone good answers. I don't know if you've noticed it in here. He's usually reading and paying attention anyway. Curtis, read all your books, page cover to cover. You going to do that?
Yes, sir.
You can do that between now and finals, right?
Yes, sir.
You know, finals start in a couple of weeks. You know that, don't you? All right. Make sure you read all your books. Everybody do all that you can. Number 6 is basically going to be a B. That's a waste spark. The pulse generator does what? What's it do? Does it fire the spark plug directly? Does it signal the computer that fires the spark plug directly? Does it signal the ignition control module? Or is it used as a tachometer reference signal by the computer and has no other function?
B, maybe?
It's going to be the one that signals the ignition control module is what it is. 2 technicians are discussing coil on plug ignition systems. Technician A says they can be installed coil near plug or coil by plug. They can, be called coil near plug or coil by plug. Technician B says some can use ion sensing. Which technician is correct? And that's Charlie. I can tell you something that can happen on some of these little 4-cylinder Asian cars. You know, you might have the idea that since you've got a waste spark ignition system, that whenever both of them are firing when the piston's up, you might feel like it really doesn't matter which one I connect to which cylinder. Like if the companion cylinders on a 6-cylinder straight 6, or you got, well, let's say a 4-cylinder, like these you guys are getting ready to, you and Kurt, you and him are going to put back together, that one out there that today, it's got to be put back together. And whenever the 2 end cylinders are coming up and going down together, those are companions. The 2 middle ones are coming up and going down together, those are companions. If you look at 1 and 2, they're doing this on a 4-cylinder, right? Okay, so you might feel like, well, it doesn't matter which coil I connect those 2 companion cylinders to, since it's waste spark anyway. Well, on some of them, not on every one, on some of them it won't run right because it's basically, you know, using compression sense or this ion business to determine which cylinder. It uses the spark plug as a sort of a cam sensor so that it knows which cylinder is firing. If you cross them, it's like having your cam signal out of sync. That's something you just need to think about. Most of the time when they've got them little short plug wires, they won't fit on there right, but maybe one way anyway. But anyway, and so, you know, 1 was B, 2 was D, 3 was D, 4 was B. And then, you know, 5 was A, 6 was B. You got that? And so the pulse generator signals the ignition control module, which you see on that board over there. You see ICM. 2 technicians are discussing coil on plug system. Never mind, number 8, I've already said that. That's both A and B. Now, what do you think of a coil on plug? What's a coil on plug? Let me a coil on plug. What's the Crown Victoria got? You take the little screw out, you pull the coils out. You remember those, right? Like the Fords? What's a coil near plug? We got one of those around here somewhere? Anybody know? The coils are near the plug, but they got little short spark plug wires. And you got 8 spark plug wires, and you got 8 coils. You seen that under the hood of that green GMC over there? That's coil near plug. It's close to it, but it's not right on the plug. One of the benefits of coil on plug is the engine controller, and I've mentioned this before, can control the timing on each cylinder separately as needs be. If the knock sensor strategy determines that it's got a spark knock on one particular cylinder for some reason, it can retard the timing on that one particular cylinder to fix the knock without retarding the ignition timing across the board. That's why on a lot of your scan tools it'll say ignition timing cylinder number 1, because it's only looking at that one. It won't look at it on all the cylinders. Let's see. A waste spark type ignition system fires what?
C.
D.
Actually, it's D. Is a one spark plug with forward polarity, one spark plug with reverse polarity, two plugs at the same time. So it's basically getting this ground all the way through it. Now, it would seem like that you could unplug one of those and both cylinders would quit firing, but that's not the way that works, because that spark's going to go somewhere. But it is basically a full circle, the way you do it. There was a spat that we got into at one of the schools I went to a long time ago about that. Technician A says a defective crankshaft position sensor can cause a no spark condition. Technician B says a faulty ignition control module can cause a no spark condition. Who's right about that? That's Charlie. Both of those guys. I'll tell you something I've seen before, too, more than you would know. I've had people call me and they say, I'm here at the grocery store and my Crown Victoria won't start, or whatever other kind of car they've got. And if it's got one of those crank sensors like you see on the front of that little Taurus engine, I say, can you put your hand on the crank sensor? And I tell them where it is. It's kind of aggravating on a Crown Vic. I says, get under there and unplug that crank sensor and plug it back in. Now, there won't be anything wrong with the way it's plugged in, but when they unplug it and plug it back in, it'll fire right up. I mean, and sometimes you run into that. I've had it happen on that Mercury Sable out there, you know. But anyway, sometimes just unplugging the crank sensor and plugging it back in will fix it. Technician A says, this is number 11, inductive ignition systems supply battery voltage to the positive side of the ignition coil and pulse the negative side of the coil on and off to ground to create a high voltage spark. What was I talking about before? I was talking about if you put your test light on the ground, and you go to the primary side of that coil, you should see a pulsing signal. If there's a pulsing signal there, but you don't have any coil firing, put a coil on it. That's pretty much how that is. Now, whenever Adam and I were working on that 626, that silly little Mazda, isn't that what that was, Adam? That it ran terrible. That was a strange thing because the fuel pump was all, the fuel filter was clogged up like a brick and had a lot of trash in there. So he steamed out the tank, put it back together, and he came back and he reported this thing ran worse than it did before. And we got to investigating that and driving it. And I said, well, that feels like a, spark issue. And whenever the smoke cleared, it turned out it had a weak ignition coil. It wouldn't jump but about a ½ an inch. Hello. Hey, Frederick, we're still tinkering with your car. It may be ready today, it may not, I'm not sure. We got the new compressor on there, but there's a bunch of other stuff I got to do too. All right. Or call me about 2 and I'll know more. Yeah, all right. Okay, let me see. What we got here is Technician A says a pickup coil can be tested with an ohm meter. Technician B says ignition coils can be tested with an ohm meter. Well, that is a C and an A and a B. But I don't like testing an ignition coil with an ohm meter because you're not loading it. And sometimes the parts house, when they plug a ignition coil into their little tester and they test it, it'll say pass, 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 and it'll still be lousy. I've had that happen. I don't like testing an ignition coil any way except firing a coil with it. Excuse me, wait a minute, module. What I'm trying to say. Let's see. Well, look at there. I was thinking. I read ignition coils, and I meant ignition modules. Used to years ago, though, and the reason I was thinking about that is that these General Motors HEI ignition coils, they used to check them with an ohm meter, and I didn't like that. That's what I was thinking about. Number 12 is C. Whatever happens. Technician A says a thorough visual inspection should be performed on all ignition components when diagnosing an engine performance problem. Technician B says platinum spark plug can be re-gapped after use in an engine. That is A only on that one, although I don't know personally what the problem is with re-gapping platinum spark plugs, but I'm sure there's probably some stuff. And spark plugs are kind of a subjective thing. I like to measure the center electrode. I've never seen that in a textbook. But measuring the center electrode resistance and comparing them from plug to plug is a good idea. I had a Champion spark plug guy, after I put that in a Motor Age article, that called fussing, or he sent me a nasty email about it. But Ford Motor Company requires you to check that, and their training Now, I've never seen it in a textbook other than Ford Motor Company, but they've got a picture on their computer screen of an ohm meter hooked up to the center electrode on a spark plug measuring the resistance, and they say it's not supposed to be over 8,000 ohms. But anyway, I like to see it about from 4 to 6 usually, and it needs to be even from one cylinder to the other. If it's a dead short or if it's wide open, I'm going to replace that spark plug. If it had and the reason I checked those, I started checking those because some of the coil on plugs were failing on some of these 4.6s and stuff, and I would just like to measure it. It doesn't cost you anything to measure it. A lot of times you'd be surprised what you find. Let me see, which one I'm on?
14.
14. Technician A says a defective spark plug wire can cause an engine miss. Technician B says a defective spark plug can cause an engine miss. Well, that's a no-brainer. You know, basically you can get both of those. Now, spark plug wires die in several ways. I'm going to give you another little thing. Typically, in all my years of doing this, and I did it 25 years, you can usually, not every time, but you can usually spot a bad plug wire. If the boot's ripped, if you spray a little soapy water on it with the engine running and you start seeing light and it starts skipping, that's a bad plug wire. And I like to use 409, not just, you know, it needs to be soapy water so it won't have the film. Okay, so if you start seeing that, if you unplug both ends of the wire and look up in there and it looks all burned up and dirty looking, I'm going to put me a wire on it. You don't typically see any failure in any way besides that, you know. 5,000 ohms per foot suspect if you're measuring it with a meter. 5,000 ohms per foot. That's resistance. That's supposed to be. And here's another little thing. The FCC doesn't want spark plug wires. Anytime you've got a spark going on, you've got radio frequency interference. And years ago, eons ago, I'm talking about like in the 70s, I bought a roll of Delco spark plug wire that was actually had a metal core. Spark plug wire that was in on a roll made to use for spark plug. And I kept a roll of that stuff for a long time. And I had the little ends to go on it. And you know, so I could crimp them and just build spark plug wires from scratch. And I built some spark plug wires for a 66 Chevrolet pickup I was working on. And I put them things on there with this metal core spark plug wires. And it cranked up and ran just fine. But the radio my dad was listening to in his shop down there went from all the way across the yard. So all of that little sparking that was going on in between those strands of wire was creating all kinds of electrical. That's why you've got these 5,000 ohm per foot carbon wires, you know, so that you don't have radio frequency interference. That's really important not to have that. But a spark plug wire, though, you think about all the ways one can fail, and that's important. And a defective spark plug obviously can cause an engine miss too. Once again, if you hear one going boo, 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 you know, either it's foul or the gap's bent shut or something like that. Which of these components can send a pulse to the signal to the electronic module? What did we just say? We were talking about that earlier. Brian?
Coil.
Pickup coil. Typical let me get my tongue untangled. Typical secondary coil resistance specifications usually range from watt to watt. That's going to be about 6,000 to 30,000 ohms. You got a lot of winding on that secondary side, millions of windings on it. And that, if you ever cut into one, be careful, don't cut into an oil-filled coil, because that oil is extremely poison in an oil-filled coil. But if you ever do see one of those where you can unspool the secondary winding in that coil, that copper wire in there is so fine, it's like a piece of thread. You can't even see it hardly. And I used to take a little tiny piece of wire like that and string them across the door, so when my sister came into the room, she'd run into that wire. You know, it didn't hurt anything, but she'd think somebody threw something at her. I mean, you wouldn't see it because you're looking past it. You know, that's how little that wire is. Let me see. Technician A says primary coil has more windings. That's dead wrong. Technician B says secondary coil has more windings. You can't. It's not going to be both technicians. That's a sort of a dumb question to have a technician A and B. B is the right one on that. Technician A says an engine will likely miss under load if the ignition coil is tracked. Now, whenever a spark has been jumping somewhere, and if it keeps jumping somewhere, it starts imprinting a little carbon track on the black phenolic part of that thing, and that carbon track becomes a very easy path to ground. Used to happen in distributor caps. The gray distributor cap like you see up there is not very prone to give that problem. The brown distributor caps, but a black distributor cap, those old phenolic ones, were terrible to do that. They'd start to get a little extra resistance somewhere along the line, maybe a loose plug wire, bad plug, whatever, and that spark's looking for somewhere else easier to go. You remember when we do the power balance test, when we pull all the plug wires off one at a time and see which one doesn't make a difference? The one that doesn't make a difference is the one that's missing, you know? In other words, if it's not contributing when you pull the wire off, it won't change anything. I like pulling the injectors now because you're not as likely to get bit or maybe disconnecting your coil on plug. Of course, you got misfire stuff. But anyway, that guy that I worked next to was a really experienced mechanic over at the Volkswagen place back in 1983 when I was working over there. And he was over working on one that was skipping, and he pulled the plug wires off, and he goes, when I pull one of these plug wires off, it runs better. And that's because of a carbon track and distributor cap. I learned that when I was working at a filling station. I said, look at your distributor cap, you probably got a carbon track in there. And he flipped it over and said, well, doggone. I don't know why he had never seen that before, because he'd done a ton of work. But that was, he said, pull it off. He's thinking out loud. He said, I pull it off, it runs better. Why does it run better? You know, because the fire order wasn't wrong. Okay, let me see here. Technician A, yeah, and 18 would be A, you know. Technician B says one wire of a waste spark coil must be grounded. Yeah, it's not so. Technician A says to use a normal spark plug when checking for spark. Technician B says a spark tester should be used to check for spark. Now, the reason you don't want to use a normal spark plug is because it's not going to give you good results. You can kind of do that on a lawnmower and might get away with it, but on a car you better use a spark tester, because it needs to be able to stretch that spark really, pop it really strong. And I'm telling you, if you're checking for spark, you need to be able to stretch that spark out to where it's about an inch long and it looks like Frankenstein. It looks like lightning. If you see one that won't jump but about a little bit, I'm telling you, you're going to have issues with it. And I preached that over here. And Lamont, whenever he went over to work at the dealership over there, he called me one day. He said, I got a Cadillac in here that won't start. And I said, well, what does the spark look like? He said, well, that's jump about a quarter of an inch. It's kind of red. I said, put a coil on it. That's what I used to tell you in class all the time, you know. And he put a coil on it and it fired up. Let me see here. Another time, this guy sent one from the city. He said, it's got everything it needs. I don't know why it won't start. When I checked, the coil was really weak. So he was letting it jump just a quarter of an inch. He thought he had enough. Recognize the problem. Diagnostic trouble code P0301. Misfire cylinder 1 on a waste spark system. It can be called by all of these except a defective pickup coil. Defective pickup coil, you don't usually have that on a waste spark system anyway. No start conditions being described on an engine is equipped with waste spark ignition. Technician A says a bad crank position sensor could be the cause. Technician B says an open spark plug wire could be the cause. It's only going to be A. You're not going to have, you know, that. All right, we're going to be hurrying here. Identify the type of ignition system shown in the diagram. What kind of ignition system is shown in the diagram? What you got there? Distributor ignition, waste spark ignition, capacitor discharge, or coil on plug? What does that look like?
Waste spark.
Waste spark, bingo. Identify the type of ignition shown in this diagram right here. What you got right there?
Coil on plug.
Yeah, listen to that, coil on plug. An ion sensing ignition system has the ability to detect what? It can detect cylinder misfire. It can also detect engine knocking, both A and B. And we got two more questions left. The use of a compression sensing ignition system allows engineers to eliminate which sensor? I mentioned this earlier.
Is it cam position?
Yeah, you didn't need a cam position if you've got a compression sense. When setting the ignition timing on a coil on plug ignition system, the technician must first do what? You can't set the timing on a coil on plug ignition system. That was funny. One day we were working on one of those and I was training this guy when I was at the dealership. And I said, all right, let's get our timing light hooked up. We got to set the timing. And about the time he got it hooked up, he realized he'd been had. You know, you can't set the timing on this, you know.